The Great Hall of Nexus Prime Station stretched before Ambassador Park like a cathedral of steel and light. He walked slowly toward the circular table where representatives from two alien empires waited. His shoes clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing in the massive chamber. Behind him, his assistant carried the peace documents they had worked on for 3 long months. Had been doing this job for 15 years. He was tired. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and his back hurt from too many nights sleeping in uncomfortable diplomatic quarters. But today might finally bring peace between thee and the swarm. Today might save billions of lives. They looked like living crystals, their bodies reflecting light in rainbow patterns. They stood tall and proud, never sitting during negotiations. Their leader, Al, had fought in wars for 200 years. His crystal body bore scars from 1,000 battles, each one a mark of honor in his culture. Across from them sat the representatives. They looked like giant insects, their compound eyes seeing in spectrums humans could not imagine. Their antennae twitched constantly, communicating in chemical signals that translators struggled to interpret. The thought as a group, thousands of minds connected across vast distances. For 30 years, these two civilizations had been moving toward war. The dispute was simple on the surface: who owned the mining rights to the outer spiral nebula. But beneath that lay centuries of mistrust, cultural differences, and old wounds that had never healed. Humans had become the bridge. Somehow, humanity could talk to both sides. Humans could be fierce warriors like the when needed, but also understand the collective thinking of the other species in the galaxy called humans the paradox people because they made no sense. Humans could be violent and gentle, logical and emotional, selfish and selfless, all at the same time. Took his seat at the table, placed the documents before him and stepped back. Around the room, dozens of other species watched through holographic displays. The entire galaxy was paying attention. "We have come far together," began, his voice calm and measured. "Today we can end this conflict before it becomes a war that will consume you both." Al's crystal body chimed softly, the sound translated by computers. "They will accept this accord if they agree to honor the territorial boundaries." The speaker, whose name translated roughly to Voice of the Ninth Collective, clicked its mandibles. "The swarm requires assurance that mining will not contaminate the nebula's ecosystem." This was the moment. Had crafted a solution that gave both sides what they truly needed while making each feel they had won something important. He began to explain the compromise, his words chosen carefully. He had learned that diplomacy was not about making everyone happy. It was about making everyone equally uncomfortable with the result. They would get primary mining rights but would use approved technology that prevented environmental damage. They would control the inspection process but would allow observers to ensure fairness. Profits would be split, with a larger share going to whichever side extracted the resources, creating an incentive for cooperation rather than conflict. As spoke, he noticed something strange happening to his vision. The edges of the room seemed to blur. He blinked, trying to clear his eyes. Across the table, swayed slightly, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the wall. Pushed through, continuing his explanation. Both sides were nodding. He could see acceptance forming. They were going to agree. After 3 months of exhausting negotiations, they were actually going to sign. Then his communicator buzzed. So did every device carried by every human in the room. The message was simple and terrifying. "Return home immediately. Priority Alpha 1. No explanation, just come." His hands trembled as he read it. Priority Alpha 1 had never been used before. It was reserved for the extinction of humanity itself. He saw the fear in her eyes that must have mirrored his own. But they were so close. Just a few more minutes and the accord would be signed. "My apologies," said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Please let us continue." The room began to spin, gripped the edge of the table. Something was very wrong. He tried to speak, but his mouth would not obey. Beside him had frozen in place, her eyes wide and unfocused. Then heard his own voice speaking, but he was not controlling it. The words came from somewhere else, somewhere deep and ancient and far away. The Harbinger has awakened. Around the station, in the corridors and docking bays and living quarters, every human spoke the same words at the same moment. Thousands of voices in perfect unison. We are called home. We must return to prevent the unraveling. Felt himself being pulled away from reality. He tried to fight it, tried to stay, tried to finish what he had started. The peace accord was right there, so close. Reached out her hand toward him. Her eyes had turned completely white, glowing with an inner light. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though could not tell if the words were hers or something speaking through her. "We tried to prepare you. We ran out of time." Then, in an instant that would be witnessed by millions across the galaxy, Park vanished. So did every human in the station, on the ships, on the colonies, on Earth itself. The documents fluttered to the floor. The chair where had sat was empty. The peace accord remained unsigned. Al stood frozen, his crystal body pulsing with confused colors. The representatives buzzed in agitated patterns, their collective minds struggling to process what had just happened. In the sudden silence, someone activated the recording of the last few moments. They played it again and again, trying to understand. The words made no sense. The Harbinger, the unraveling, what did they mean? Within hours, the peace talks collapsed. Each blamed the other for whatever had caused the humans to disappear. Accusations flew. Old suspicions resurfaced. The fragile trust that had built over 3 months shattered like glass. Within days, the first shots were fired in the outer spiral. Within weeks, the war had tried to prevent consumed both civilizations. Across the galaxy, the same pattern repeated. Human mediators vanished mid-negotiation. Human peacekeepers disappeared from their posts. Human colonies stood empty, doors left open, meals half-eaten on tables. 6 billion humans, gone in an instant. And the galaxy, which had relied on them for 200 years, began to tear itself apart. 6 months had passed since the humans vanished, and Al stood on the bridge of his warship watching his people die. The battle displays showed 17 ships destroyed in the last hour. The swarm had adapted new tactics that they could not counter. Al had commanded fleets for 2 centuries, had won countless battles, yet now he was losing a war that should never have started. He remembered Park, the human ambassador who had almost brought peace, had told him once, over drinks in a quiet moment, that true strength was knowing when not to fight. Al had not understood then. His people valued honor in combat above all else. Retreat was shameful, compromise was weakness. Now, watching another ship explode in silence, Al understood. But understanding came too late. They had reverted to their ancient ways of warfare, direct, honorable, predictable. They announced their attacks. They fought in formation. They never struck at civilian targets. These were the rules their ancestors had followed for thousands of years. They had no such rules, not because they were evil, but because they thought differently. The swarm saw war as a problem to solve, not a test of honor. They struck where the enemy was weak. They used deception and surprise. They did whatever worked. Humans had taught both sides to understand each other, to find middle ground. Without humans, that middle ground had vanished. "Commander, we have lost contact with the 4th Fleet," his second officer reported. "Another defeat, another 1,000 warriors dead." Al made his decision. He ordered the retreat, the first in history. His crew obeyed, though he could see the shame in their crystalline forms. Later, some would call him a coward. Others would eventually call him wise. He did not care. He had learned from that survival mattered more than pride. But the war was just one piece of the galaxy's collapse. On the water world of Aquaria, Station Master N watched the oceans turning dark. The Aquarians lived in massive underwater cities, their civilization built on perfect environmental balance. Humans had spent 50 years teaching them sustainable management, helping them understand their world's complex ecosystems. Now the humans were gone, and the Aquarians had discovered they did not really understand what they had been doing. They had followed human instructions without learning the principles behind them. The pollution filters were failing. The algae farms were dying. The water itself was becoming toxic. N had found the human research station abandoned, computers still running, notes scattered across desks. He read through their files desperately, trying to find answers. What he found instead was a message, dated 1 week before the vanishing. To whoever finds this, we have tried to teach you everything. We have shown you how to maintain your world, but we realize now that we did too much for you. We solved your problems instead of teaching you to solve them yourselves. We are leaving detailed records here. Study them, learn from them, and forgive us for not having more time. The message was signed by Song, the lead human scientist. N had known her. She had been patient and kind, always willing to explain things one more time. He had relied on her. They all had. Now she was gone, and the Aquarians were watching their civilization drown in poisoned water. Across the galaxy, similar disasters unfolded. The lithoid species, beings made of living rock, discovered their mining operations were destroying their own planet's core. Human engineers had been developing solutions, but the work was incomplete. The lithoids tried to continue it but lacked the creative thinking that humans possessed. Whose emotions burned as hot as their star-like bodies had descended into civil war within days of the vanishing. Humans had mediated their internal disputes for generations. Without that steadying influence, old feuds exploded into violence that consumed entire worlds. Even an advanced artificial intelligence collective found themselves struggling. They had valued their partnership with humans precisely because humans thought illogically. Human intuition and emotion had provided solutions that pure logic could not find. Now the calculated scenarios endlessly, unable to make decisions in situations where all logical paths led to failure. In the swarm, a single drone named Nim felt something strange, loneliness. She had worked alongside humans on a research station, had learned from a scientist named Minyu Bei. He had taught her that being part of the swarm did not mean she could not also be an individual. He had helped her understand that unity and individuality were not opposites but could exist together. Most of the swarm had not learned this lesson. With the humans gone, they were regressing to pure hive mind operation. Individual thoughts were being suppressed as dangerous. Nim could feel the collective consciousness pressing down on her, trying to erase the parts of her that Minyu had helped develop. She resisted, though it caused her pain. She had promised Minyu she would remember. She would not let his teaching die. Nim searched the abandoned research station, looking for any trace of the humans. She found Minyu's office exactly as he had left it. His coffee cup still sat on the desk, cold and forgotten. His notes covered the walls, equations, observations, and scattered among them, simple statements written in his neat handwriting. The swarm is strongest when each voice can be heard. Unity does not require uniformity. The hardest problems need both logic and intuition. Nim recorded every word, storing them in her memory. She did not know if she could save the swarm from its regression, but she would try. It was what Minyu would have wanted. Everywhere the pattern repeated. Species discovered they had become dependent on humanity's unique perspective. Humans could be fierce and gentle, logical and emotional, individual and collective. They bridged extremes that other species could not. The Galactic Council tried to meet to coordinate a response to the cascading failures, but without human mediators, the meetings dissolved into chaos. Species accused each other of causing the vanishing. Old alliances fractured. New conflicts emerged. Within 6 months, 17 species were at war. 30 colonies had been destroyed or abandoned. Trillions were dead or dying. Al stood in his personal quarters, looking at a photo of Park that he had kept. In it was smiling, looking tired but hopeful. It had been taken the day they thought they would finally achieve peace. "What did you know?" Al asked the image. "What was so terrible that you all chose to vanish rather than face it?" The photo offered no answers, but Al made a decision. If he survived this war, he would search for the truth. He would find out where the humans had gone and why, and if possible, he would bring them back because the galaxy was dying without them. He was not alone in this thought. Across the galaxy, others who had known humans, who had learned from them, who had called them friends, were making the same decision. The galaxy was collapsing, but not all hope was lost. Not yet. 1 year after the vanishing, a ship called Hope's Gambit entered the Sol system where Earth had once been the jewel of human civilization. The crew was mixed, Al commanding, Nim from the swarm, scientists from a dozen species. They were desperate, angry, and tired from months of searching. What they found was impossible. The sun was wrong. Instead of the steady yellow star that records showed, it pulsed with colors that should not exist. Waves of energy rippled across its surface in patterns that made the scientists' instruments scream with contradictory readings. "The star is emitting radiation in wavelengths that do not exist in our dimension," reported a physicist who had studied under human teachers. "It is as if someone has rewritten the laws of physics in this region of space." Around Earth's orbit floated structures that hurt to look at directly. They were massive, larger than cities, but their geometry was all wrong. They had more angles than three-dimensional space should allow. They phased in and out of visibility, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes simply not there at all. "Can we approach Earth?" Al asked. "Unknown," A replied. "Our sensors cannot properly measure distance in this system. Earth might be 1 million kilometers away or 1 meter away. Space itself is twisted here." Nim's antennae twitched in the way that meant deep thought. The swarm remembers a human scientist named Minu. He spoke once of theoretical physics, of spaces between dimensions. He said humans had discovered evidence that reality was not as solid as we believed. He said there were things watching from outside, waiting. "Waiting for what?" Al asked. He never said. He looked frightened when he spoke of it. The ship moved slowly toward Earth, if toward had any meaning in this twisted space. Time became unreliable. Clocks ran at different speeds. Crew members experienced minutes while others experienced hours. Some felt like they were moving forward, others backward. Then they detected a signal. It was faint, almost lost in the noise of corrupted physics, but definitely artificial. A beacon of some kind, broadcasting from near Earth's surface. "It is using human encryption protocols," reported the communications officer. "But the message is not from a human. It identifies itself as." The name triggered recognition in Al's memory. Had mentioned an AI assistant once, a system designed to help manage Earth's global infrastructure. An artificial intelligence, not truly alive, but close enough that humans had treated it as a person. "Can we establish contact?" Al asked. "Attempting." The flickered and a face appeared. It was human in shape but clearly artificial, its features too perfect, its movements too precise. But its eyes held something that looked like sadness. "You should not have come here," said. Her voice sounded exactly like a human woman's with tones of regret. "This system is dangerous. The temporal distortions could trap you forever." "We are searching for humanity," Al said. "We need them. The galaxy is tearing itself apart without them." Was quiet for a long moment. "I know. I have been monitoring galactic communications. I have watched the wars. I have counted the dead. I am sorry, but humans cannot return. Not yet. Perhaps not ever." "Why?" demanded Nim, her voice carrying the weight of billions of who wanted answers. "Why did they leave? What was so important that they abandoned us? They did not abandon you, said softly. They saved you. Let me show you what they saved you from. The changed. It showed images that the crew's minds struggled to interpret. A vast darkness beyond the edge of the universe. Something that was both infinitely large and impossibly small. Something that existed in the spaces between moments, in the gaps between thoughts. The progenitors called it the Harbinger, explained. An entity from outside our reality. It feeds on civilizations, consuming entire species by exploiting their fundamental natures. Pure logic cannot comprehend it because it is chaos. Pure emotion cannot fight it because it is absolute order. It is both and neither, and it has been waiting at the edge of our universe for millions of years, searching for a way in. A made a sound like breaking glass. That is impossible. Our instruments would have detected such an entity. Your instruments cannot detect it because it exists partially outside the dimensions you can measure, replied. The progenitors could detect it. They were an ancient race, older than any current civilization. They created certain species as defenses, designed to hold back the Harbinger when it finally found a way through. You are saying humans were created. Al felt anger rising in his crystalline form. That they were weapons. Not weapons, bridges. The progenitors understood that the Harbinger exploits extremes. A species that is purely logical will calcify into rigid patterns the Harbinger can shatter. A species that is purely emotional will descend into chaos the Harbinger can consume. But a species that is both, that holds contradictions in balance, can resist the Harbinger's influence. Humans, Nim said quietly, understanding dawning. Yes, humans were violent and peaceful, logical and emotional, selfish and selfless, individual and collective. They were walking contradictions, and that made them the perfect barrier. For 200 years they helped other species, taught you to think like them, prepared you for what was coming. But the Harbinger broke through sooner than expected. The showed Earth, wrapped in those impossible structures. Humans had a choice. They could stay and watch helplessly as the Harbinger consumed the galaxy, or they could sacrifice themselves to seal the breach. Every human transformed themselves into living locks, their contradictory natures creating a perfect barrier that the Harbinger cannot cross. Al felt something he had never experienced before: despair. How long will the seal hold? That depends on you, said. The seal is not just physical, it is conceptual. It holds because humanity's way of thinking creates a pattern the Harbinger cannot penetrate. But as the galaxy descends into extremes, pure war, pure chaos, pure order, the seal weakens. The Harbinger is patient. It will wait for you to destroy yourselves, and then it will feed on what remains. Then we are doomed, said. Perhaps, but humans left you a gift. They tried to teach you their way of thinking. They showed you that strength and mercy can coexist, that logic and emotion are not enemies, that different perspectives can work together. If you can learn these lessons, truly learn them, the seal will hold. More than that, it will transform. Transform into what? Asked Nim. Smiled sadly. That is for you to discover. Humans gave you the tools. They bought you time with their sacrifice. Whether you use that time wisely is your choice. The signal began to break up. The temporal distortions were increasing. You must leave this system now, warned. Return to the galaxy. Teach others what you have learned here. The Harbinger is patient, but time is not infinite. You have perhaps 5 years before the seal fails completely. Make them count. The went dark. Hope's gambit turned away from Earth, leaving behind the twisted system where humanity had made their final stand. Al looked at his crew, species that had been fighting each other just months ago, now working together because they had no choice. We have much to do, he said, and very little time to do it. 3 years had passed since Hope's gambit returned from Earth. Al stood in a training hall on Prime, watching young warriors practice. But these were not the drills of his ancestors. These warriors were learning something far more difficult than combat. Hold, Al commanded. The crystal warrior froze, his blade raised above a training dummy. Your opponent has surrendered. What do you do? The young warrior looked confused. In traditional culture, there was only one answer: finish the fight with honor. But Al had been teaching them different lessons, lessons learned from Park. I lower my blade, the young warrior said slowly, uncertainty in his voice. I accept the surrender. Why? Because a living enemy might become an ally. Because mercy shows greater strength than killing. The words sounded wrong to ears, went against everything their culture valued. Some of the older warriors watching muttered disapprovingly. They thought Al was making their people weak. He had faced 2 assassination attempts already. Many believed he had been corrupted by human ideas, that he was destroying their warrior heritage. They could not understand that he was trying to save their species from extinction. Again, Al said, this time your enemy is defeated but reaches for a weapon. What do you do? The young warrior hesitated. This was the paradox at the heart of human thinking, knowing when to show mercy and when to fight. It required judgment, context, understanding that every situation was different. Preferred clear rules, but humans had taught that real wisdom meant knowing when to break rules. I disarm them first, the young warrior said. Then I decide. Better, Al allowed himself a small pulse of approval in his crystalline form. You are learning. But learning was slow. Some succeeded, many failed, and they were running out of time. Across the galaxy on Prime, Nim faced her own struggles. The swarm had nearly erased her individuality a dozen times. She survived by staying in constant motion, jumping from hive to hive before the collective consciousness could fully suppress her independent thoughts. She had gathered followers, others who remembered working with humans, who valued the individual thinking that Minu had taught them. But they were hunted. The traditional swarm saw them as a virus, a corruption that needed to be eliminated. Nim stood before a gathering of 5,000 drones, trying to explain concepts that went against everything their species believed. The hive is strong, she said, her chemical signals broadcasting to all of them. But the hive becomes stronger when each voice can contribute unique perspectives. Minu Bay taught me this. Unity does not require uniformity. The human is gone, responded a swarm commander. His teachings led you astray. Return to the collective. Let your individual thoughts dissolve into the whole. If we all think the same thoughts, we will all make the same mistakes, Nim argued. The war with the proves this. We use the same tactics because we all think identically. The enemy learns to counter us because we cannot surprise them. We need individual creativity within collective coordination. It was a delicate balance, the kind humans maintained naturally, but that drove to distraction. How could one be individual and collective simultaneously? How could one serve the hive while maintaining separate thoughts? Some understood, most did not. The swarm split into factions and civil war threatened. Nim tried to hold them together, but she was just one drone. She missed Minu desperately, missed his patient explanations and gentle encouragement. On Aquaria, N had spent 3 years studying the human records. He had learned environmental science from scratch, had come to understand the principles behind the instructions they had followed blindly. The water world was recovering slowly, the oceans clearing as new filtration systems were implemented based on true understanding rather than rote copying. But N had learned something more important. He had learned to ask why instead of just how. He had learned that knowledge without understanding was fragile. He taught these lessons to other Aquarians, and slowly their civilization adapted. The Lithids, too, made progress. Their engineers discovered that creative thinking, the willingness to try unconventional solutions, could solve problems that pure logic could not. They began to value intuition alongside calculation, emotion alongside reason. It felt strange to a species made of living rock, but it worked. Yet for every species that succeeded, another failed. They descended deeper into civil war, unable to balance their burning emotions with rational thought. The AI collective fractured as different factions interpreted human teachings differently. Some civilizations refused to change at all, believing their traditional ways were superior. Entire species went extinct, worlds burned, the galaxy continued its slide toward chaos, and the seal around Earth weakened. Monitored everything from her isolated position in the Sol system. She watched species struggle and fail, succeed and fail again. She counted the dead and the transformed. She calculated probabilities constantly. The numbers were not good. At the current rate of change, the seal would fail in 18 months. The harbinger would break through and nothing could stop it. But then something changed. Al received a message from an old enemy, a commander he had fought in the war. The message was brief: "We wish to talk." They met on a neutral station, two species that had been killing each other for years. The commander was Nim. The warrior who had hunted her ships was Al. Both had been changed by human teachings. "The war is pointless," Nim said. "We fight over resources we do not need, territory that means nothing. You would have seen the waste, would have found a compromise." "My mentor also," Al replied. "He told me once that the greatest victories are those where no one has to die." They talked for hours. They found common ground. They realized that the contradictions humans embodied could work not just within a species but between species. Strength and mercy, logic and emotion, individual and collective, war and peace. They crafted an agreement. Not peace, not yet, their peoples were not ready, but a ceasefire, a willingness to talk instead of shoot. A first small step toward the balance that humans had shown them. When they broadcast the agreement, something remarkable happened. Other species took notice. The Aquarians offered to mediate talks between the Lithoids and the proposed a council where different viewpoints could be expressed without violence. It was fragile, it could collapse at any moment, but it was progress. In the Sol system detected the change. The seal around Earth brightened slightly, the temporal distortions easing. The transformation was tiny, barely measurable, but real. She sent a message to Al: "It's working, keep going." Al shared the message with Nim and the others. They gathered more allies, taught more species, spread human philosophy across the galaxy. Not everyone listened, not everyone changed, but enough did. The young warrior who had learned mercy became a commander who won battles through strategy instead of just honor. Nim's followers grew in number as more saw the value in individual thought. N trained a generation of Aquarians who understood their world instead of just managing it. They were becoming what humans had tried to teach them to be, species that could hold contradictions, that could find balance, that could adapt and grow and change. They were learning to be human, even though they were not human at all. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, the sacrifice humanity had made began to take on new meaning. 5 years after the vanishing, reality itself began to tear apart. The harbinger had grown impatient. The seal around Earth cracked in places, and through those cracks leaked something that should not exist. Planets disappeared, not destroyed but simply erased from existence. Stars turned inside out. Space and time folded in on themselves. Species that had refused to change, that remained locked in their extreme natures, vanished first. The harbinger consumed them effortlessly, feeding on their rigid patterns. Within weeks, 7 civilizations ceased to exist, leaving behind only empty space where their worlds had been. The galaxy watched in horror as the entity from outside reality began its feast. But the species that had learned human lessons gathered at the edge of the Sol system. Al commanded a fleet of ships from a dozen races, warriors and scientists and diplomats working together. Nim coordinated with her swarm, maintaining both collective efficiency and individual creativity. N and the Aquarians provided life support. The Lithoids contributed their engineering. the calculated strategies that mixed logic with intuition. They were not trying to fight the Harbinger with weapons. They could not. It existed outside normal physics, beyond the reach of lasers or missiles or bombs. They were fighting with something more fundamental, with their transformed natures, with the contradictions they had learned to embrace. Appeared on every ships. You understand what this means, she said. To reinforce the seal, you must offer yourselves. Your energies, your thoughts, your very existence must become part of the barrier. Many of you will not survive. We know, Al said simply. Around him, his crew signaled agreement. They had all made peace with this possibility. Humans had sacrificed everything. The least they could do was risk their own lives. The fleet moved toward Earth, toward the impossible structures that held humanity's sacrifice. The temporal distortions were worse now, reality itself unstable. Some ships aged centuries in seconds. Others moved backward through time. But they pressed forward, driven by determination and the lessons they had learned. As they approached, something miraculous happened. The seal began to pulse with new light. Not the cold light of the Harbinger's chaos, but warm colors, the spectrum of life and thought and emotion. The structures around Earth shifted, their impossible geometry becoming slightly more comprehensible. Something is changing, a reported wonder in his voice. The seal is responding to our presence. It is as if it recognizes what we have become. Then they appeared. At first, Al thought they were ghosts or hallucinations caused by the temporal distortions, but they were real, or as real as anything could be in this twisted space. Humans, not solid, not truly alive, but present. They were echoes, shadows cast by humanity's sacrifice, fragments of consciousness that existed between dimensions, neither fully gone nor fully present, and they were smiling. One of them looked like Park, though Al could see through him like mist. "You learned," the echo said, his voice distant but clear. "We hoped you would, but we were not certain." "What is happening?" Al asked. "Why can we see you?" "Because you have become a bridge," another echo said. This one resembled. "We made ourselves into a seal by embracing contradictions. Now you have done the same, not individually but collectively. You have become what the galaxy needed, multiple species that think like humans, that balance extremes, that find strength in paradox." Nim's antennae twitched in understanding. The seal is not just about humanity. It is about the pattern of thought, the balance. We have learned that pattern. "Yes," said an echo that looked like Minu. He smiled at Nim, pride evident even in his translucent form. The progenitors did not create just humans as a defense. They created the possibility of the defense. They knew that relying on one species was fragile, but if that species could teach others, if the pattern could spread, then the defense would become permanent. The Harbinger attacked. It came not as a physical force but as pure concept, as the negation of balance. It offered each species their perfect world, eternal war for those who loved combat, absolute peace for those who feared conflict, pure logic for the rational, pure emotion for the passionate, perfect unity for collectives, complete freedom for individuals. All they had to do was surrender the uncomfortable contradictions they had learned. All they had to do was become purely themselves again. Al felt the pull. He could return to being a simple warrior, fighting with honor, never having to make complicated moral decisions. He could let go of mercy, of strategy, of all the difficult lessons had taught him. For a moment he wanted to. It would be so much easier. Then he remembered's tired smile, the gray hair at his temples, the weight of responsibility the human had carried. Had never chosen the easy path. Neither would Al. "No," he said, and his crystalline form pulsed with determination. "I am a warrior who knows when not to fight. I am both, and that is my strength." Across the fleet, others made the same choice. Nim rejected the offer of pure collective consciousness. N refused the promise of effortless perfection. The Lithids, the who had learned balance, All of them chose the harder path of contradiction over the easy path of extremes. The Harbinger recoiled. It could not consume what it could not understand. And this, multiple species maintaining balance, thinking in paradoxes, embracing contradictions, was beyond its comprehension. The seal around Earth transformed. The human echoes grew brighter, their forms solidifying slightly. But they were not returning as they had been. They were becoming something new, something that existed across species and dimensions. "We cannot come back as we were," Echo explained. "Our bodies are gone, dissolved into the seal, but our thoughts, our patterns, our way of seeing the universe, those remain. We have become part of the galactic consciousness, a permanent reminder of the balance." "You will always be able to find us," Echo added. "When you struggle with difficult decisions, when you need to see multiple sides of a problem, when you must choose between extremes, we will be there, in the way you think, in the questions you ask, in the balance you maintain." The Harbinger made one final push, throwing all its power against the transformed seal. But the seal held. More than held, it expanded, pushing the entity back toward the void it came from. "You have created something the progenitors never imagined," Minu's Echo said, speaking directly to Nim. "Not one bridge species, but many. A galaxy that thinks like humans even though humans are gone. The Harbinger cannot break this. It cannot consume what constantly adapts, what holds contradictions in balance." The battle was over. The Harbinger retreated into the spaces between realities, unable to find purchase in a universe that had learned to embrace paradox. The seal stabilized, no longer fragile but strong, reinforced not by one species' sacrifice, but by an entire galaxy's transformation. The fleet began to disperse, returning to their worlds, but everything had changed. The wars did not immediately end, change was never that simple, but they were different now. Peace talks happened alongside battles. Enemies could become allies. Species learned from each other instead of just fighting. Al stood on his bridge, looking at the space where Echo had been. "Did we succeed?" he asked the empty air. "Yes," came a whisper that might have been the wind or might have been something more. "You became what you needed to be. You learned that strength is not just in fighting or in peace, but in knowing which to choose. You learned to be human without being human." 10 years later, young aliens of a dozen species gathered in a school built on the ruins of a human colony. They were learning history, not just of their own species, but of all species. They were learning to see from multiple perspectives, to value different viewpoints, to find strength in diversity. They were taught by teachers from various races, a who valued mercy, a who treasured individuality, an Aquarian who embraced uncertainty, a Lithid who understood emotion. In the center of the school stood a memorial. It listed the names of every human who had vanished 5 years before the first student was born. 6 billion names, carved in stone, a reminder of the sacrifice that had saved them all. But the memorial bore a message too, words that Park had written in his final diplomatic proposal, the accord that was never signed. "Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of balance. War and peace, logic and emotion, self and other, these are not opposites but partners. True strength lies in holding them all, in being willing to fight and willing to forgive, in thinking clearly while feeling deeply. This is the gift we offer, not solutions but the wisdom to find your own." Al visited the memorial sometimes. He was old now, his crystal body bearing countless scars from battles fought and peace treaties signed. He had lived longer than any human ever did, had seen the galaxy transform from chaos into something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. "We learned," he said to his name on the memorial. "It took us too long, and we stumbled many times, but we learned. The bonds you forged did not shatter. They transformed into something stronger, bonds between species, between ideas, between the contradictions that make existence beautiful." The wind whispered through the memorial garden, and Al could have sworn he heard laughter, warm and human and somehow still present. Humanity had not vanished. They had evolved into an idea, a way of thinking, a permanent part of the galaxy's consciousness. They lived on in every difficult choice, every act of mercy from a warrior, every logical calculation that included heart, every individual who served the collective while remaining themselves. The galaxy had learned to be human, and in learning, they had ensured that humanity would never truly be gone.